So I'm going to preach today on the times that you can't really tell anybody what's going on other than the Lord. It's an interesting thing that God is eternal and he does not change. And so anytime we make an observation about society, I think we need to kind of keep that in mind. The Bible, Billy Graham preached this once, that in the latter days, the love of many will wax cold, and Billy Graham said that things will get worse and worse and worse. And what's interesting is God doesn't change, but he changes us to see what he has always seen. He helps us see, where we used to love sin and revel in it and partake in it and didn't see it the way God sees it. Once we get called and redeemed, now sin is intolerable to us. So it's interesting how that works, that we're the ones that God doesn't change. We're the ones that change, and God's the one that changes us. With that being said, I'm getting at I feel like I've always been this way a little bit, but now let me see if I can explain. I'm just getting really annoyed with the secular, particularly on the internet. But it's getting intolerably annoying. Now, that being said, my temperament is such that I do get annoyed, and a lot of times I tell the Lord that I'm annoyed, and a lot of times I don't like what he tells me, and I tell him that he's annoying me, and then he's getting on my nerves. And it's just part of my nature to do that. Now, in the long run, this doesn't work. It really doesn't work in the long run. But in the short run, it seems as if there's no way around it in my particular situation. And here's the point I'm getting at with regards to why the secular annoys me. The problem is that it's not really a problem per se, but it's the truth. Ultimately, the only person the only one that you can ever talk to is God. If you can't talk to God, then you need to find somebody who can talk to God for you. But ultimately, the only person that you can talk to is God, because no one else is going to understand it or get it. Even if you have two people suffering through the exact same thing, because of sin, it's very likely that there's going to be a clash. I mean, if you go on the internet and go to any help forum or anything, it's real easy to find trolls or whatever you want to call them, people whose heart is not right with the Lord. I mean, even content-wise, not even from a comment section, but from a producer standpoint. It's like these people do not know the Lord. There's no way they know the Lord because of the stuff they're putting out there. And it gets increasingly annoying to not be able to avoid it, to see it everywhere you go. And you might say, Cody, you need to read your Bible. I do read my Bible. And then when you take a break, you go to the internet, and then all you see is just garbage. And what I wanted to talk about is ultimately, God is the only one that can help you with your problems, even with your problems with him. If you have a problem with God, you can't go to anybody else but God with the problem. And if God is not responding to your issue, then you just have to wait until he changes you and the issue becomes resolved. Secularly, it's not really a good idea to seek out secular help. In fact, it's a terrible idea to seek out secular help, because they're always going to lead you in the wrong direction. And it's just a really bad idea. And it's really frustrating that that's the case. Now, it's always been the case. It's always been that way. The Bible says, woe to them that go down into Egypt for help. I mean, you're supposed to go to God. And when there's a problem, when there's a problem, ultimately, you kind of just have to wait until God resolves it a lot of times. And that's not always easy. And in the time of waiting, it's tempting to say, it's tempting to go to your friends, to go to your family, even to go to a pastor maybe, but especially friends or family or strangers on the internet and say, here's the issue. The Lord's told me to do this, and I've been doing it, and I've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and it's driving me crazy. I'm not getting anywhere with the Lord. I'm not getting where I want to be. I'm not getting where I need to be. I'm not getting anywhere. And you can't go to like Reddit or something and just get a bunch of secular advice, because they're going to lead you in the wrong direction. And that's really annoying that the secular is so prevalent and the sacred is so almost hidden, I guess you could say. And it's hard because in my case, I feel like the Lord's trying to teach me patience. And considering how antithetical that has been for me, it's really difficult for me to learn patience, to just wait. It really is. But if I were to go to secular means and type on Reddit and say this, they're just going to say a bunch of advice that I know God doesn't want for me, because God's already talked to me about what he wants me to do. He's already shown me what he wants me to do. He's already in the process of doing his will. And it really involves patience. And really, patience is just waiting. It's just sitting and waiting and waiting and waiting. Now, in eager expectation, sure. When God says something, it's going to be done. But the waiting is really difficult. It's very difficult to wait on the Lord. It really is. For me, anyway. Maybe for you it's easier, but I think to a certain extent it's difficult for everybody to wait on the Lord. It just is. It's very difficult to wait on the Lord. And that's why I think that patience is learned. And I feel like some people are better than that than others. And I think just God makes everybody different. Our experiences are different. Our personalities are different. But for me, waiting has been incredibly difficult. And in the process of waiting, I've gotten almost irrationally angry. I mean, so mad I could just shake. Now, if I were to go to secular means to talk about this, I'm not going to be getting the advice that I need. The secular world does not understand the sacred world. It really doesn't. If you're spiritually blind to Christ, you're not going to understand Christian problems. That's just the facts. You can't understand a spiritual problem if you're spiritually blind. And so going to the internet for help is like it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work for a spiritual problem. I mean, if you're specifically seeking out spiritual solutions on the internet, maybe, but if you're just going on Reddit or something, or if you're trying to go to psychiatrists, or especially like Reddit or even Facebook friends or something, like, I'm going through this issue, it's very likely that they're going to give you advice that goes contrary to what God wants you to do, especially if God's already told you what he wants you to do. Then if he's told you what he wants you to do, you can, even if you were to tell people, they might not believe you. If they do, then they're going to say the same thing that God tells you. Well, you have to wait. And so my point is that it's difficult to wait on the Lord. It is. For me, it's difficult. There's not really any option. There's no alternative. It's the best alternative to wait on the Lord. It really is. But it's hard. It's hard to wait on the Lord. It just is. There's no way around it. There's no way around it, and there's nowhere else to turn to with the frustration in the middle of waiting. There's no other there's no higher court to go to, or whatever you want to say. There's no way that you could say, hey, Facebook family or Reddit or whatever, the Lord's telling me this, and I don't like it, and it's getting on my nerves, and I need you to help change the Lord's mind. You can't do that. It doesn't work that way. So I guess the point of this was to say you can't seek out secular help for spiritual problems. You can't. And also, waiting on the Lord is very difficult for me. I hope it's easy for you. I really do. I hope you're like, man, that was kind of easy. Because, I hope it's easier for you than it is for me. Because I find it pretty difficult considering my temperament. My temperament gets very explosive. And once again, I'm not completely bashing secular help, don't get me wrong. But secular help does not always provide you the ultimate help that you need. A lot of times spiritual help is it's better, even if it's more difficult. The secular help might be complicated, but it might not get to the root of the problem. Spiritual help, in a sense, can be difficult, but also easier, but it always gets to the root of the problem. The spiritual problem always gets to the root. It always gets to the root, and when it gets to the root, a lot of times it's really ugly and brutal and disgusting, and you have to look at yourself in the mirror, and it's hard to be confronted in that way. But it's even if the secular does that, there's an element of it that's missing. There's a very important element that's missing in secular help, especially if they're antagonistic towards Christ. I mean, if they're just outright antagonistic, you need to walk out the door. If they're kind of unsure, you probably should walk out the door. And if you can't understand the spiritual until you've been born again, and then even when you've been born again, a lot of times, I'm still, my struggle is patience. My struggle is patience. My temper still can be very quick. And so therefore, I feel like God is making me wait a really long time. I feel like if you have a naturally short temper, then what God does is he makes you wait longer than everyone else does to try to get that out of you. If your temper is naturally longer, then I don't feel like you have to wait as long. Maybe you do. Maybe you need to wait longer because God will allow you to suffer, to bear it. But I almost feel like if you have a short temper, God sometimes will say, I'm going to force you to wait longer than other people because I'm trying to break you of this temper. And I feel like that's what he's been doing with me lately, is trying to get me to break this temper, this real just snappy attitude, just where everything comes easy and you expect everything to be easy, and you're just always in an entitled bad mood, or just snap your fingers and it's fixed. If you're used to that, then when it doesn't happen, you're like, okay, something's wrong here. It's not supposed to be this hard. It's supposed to be easy because it's always been easy. I've always been able to figure it out. But sometimes God will it's almost like he's making a spectacle of you. Like, okay, sure, I gave you all these gifts. Whether or not you recognize me for it, fine. But now, what I'm going to do is put you in a situation that is completely beyond your control. That way you have to rely on me. You have no choice. You can't do this on your own. And a lot of times I feel like that's what the secular people miss with regards to changing your personality. If you have behavioral problems, a lot of times well, most of the time, the secular world does not get to the root of the issue. The root of the issue is always spiritual. It's always, sin affects every aspect of our lives, and Christ's grace is the one that takes it off of us. So that's the solution. The grace of God is always the solution. But the secular world, it's always behavioral therapy and talking things out. But if there's no sacred bent to it, then it's not going to last. It's not going to last. You'll be back in the office again. You'll be back taking the pills again. You'll be back, I'm not saying these things aren't helpful. I'm just saying the ultimate root of the problem is spiritual. Ultimately, it's a spiritual problem. Ultimately, all of our problems are spiritual problems. They can manifest themselves in the physical world, but it was a spiritual reality. Sin was a spiritual problem. It was a reality that affected the spiritual side of life. The spiritual side of life is the real side of life. It's the eternal side of life. And psychiatry does not get to the, let's put it this way, secular psychiatry does not get to the ultimate eternal side of life. And sometimes even in the eternal side of life, you hit a roadblock. And that's been true for me. The Lord's trying to teach me patience instead of, it's like if you've been going to work, if your commute's the same every day and you eat the same thing every day and everything's smooth and you have everything timed out perfectly where I get to work exactly on time and all this, well, that detour is going to throw you off. Any detour will just kind of throw you off. If you're the type of person that just likes everything to click and smooth and you plan everything out, which is the way I've been for a long time, detours just make everything fly all to pieces. And I feel like God sometimes is trying to say, well, maybe that routine that you thought was really important wasn't as important as you thought. Maybe that detour was not as devastating as you thought. Maybe there's something more important that you missed. Even all that time that you were, never late to work, always on time, very diligent, very hard worker, very routine oriented, always had the same meal every day. Even in all that routine, God was like, all right, you got this routine now, but you're missing the bigger picture. I'm going to show you the bigger picture. And the way I'm going to do that is to give you this detour that you cannot avoid. And it's going to force you to rely on me. There's no way out. There's no shortcut. there's no alternative route on the map to get there other than the way that I tell you to go, because I've got every shortcut blocked off. So you have to go the way that I want you to go. And in that process, originally you're gonna be like, oh man, I've never been late. I haven't been late for years. You're making me late today? Really? Why are you making me late today? I've never been late for years. I mean, you could do the same thing with health or any curveball, but for me, it's more about patience. I feel like he's really trying to teach me patience because I'm so routine oriented and I'm so routine driven, and I feel like he's throwing me curveballs to test my patience or to develop my patience, not just test it, but to develop it. Like, there's really no other way for you to learn this other than the way that I am teaching it to you. Because if there were, then I would do that. But there is no other way. Like with the cross, Jesus said, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. If there's any other way to save people, I don't want to die on the cross. But he said, nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. So if he was the perfect example of humanity. So ultimately, we have to say the same thing. We have to say, God, I don't want to suffer. I don't want to go through this. I don't want to change. I don't want to change. I don't want to change. Everything's been good. Everything's been great. Why should I change? Well, if God says it, then that's it. That's it. If God says it, that's it. There's no way to argue with God. There's no way to change his mind. I mean, we can pray and talk to him, but ultimately God's will is the will that is. Even Jesus had to say that. Not my will, but thy will be done. The Son of God had to say that to God the Father. Not my will, but thy will be done. So if he had to say that, then I know we have to say that too. And so I just wanted to leave you that my point, in conclusion, I guess what I want to say is, if you seek secular help, they're always going to, a lot of times, not always, but most of the advice you get is not going to be helpful. Because it'll be like, it'll just be, a lot of it will be dismissive. Not all of it, but a lot of it will just be dismissive when God's like, Cody, there's only one way to do this, and it's the long, hard, patient way. If you try to seek out other methods other than the ones that I've chosen, you're not going to change in the way that I want you to change. And if you don't change in the way that I want you to change, then what is the upside to you changing? If you're changing the way that I don't want you to change, then that's not going to be beneficial. So the only way that you can change is the way that I want you to change, and the timeline that I've chosen, and the ways that I've chosen, and the methods that I've chosen, and you will become what I want you to become. That's the only solution. And in the process of that, it can be very difficult, particularly for me learning patience. Like, I currently am just waiting for the Lord to get me to the ultimate patience point. But it doesn't work that way. I'm still trying to say, okay, Lord, if I'm supposed to be patient, then let me be patient now. And that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Okay, Lord, if I'm supposed to be patient, then just give me patience right now, instantly, and we'll be good. Well, that's not the way the Lord gives patience most of the time. Most of the time, it takes a period of time and testing and moments and circumstances, and then your patience grows, and it's a gift from God. He says, look, here's how I do this. I give you this little bit of patience, and then this circumstance comes up, and then your patience grows. So that's currently the stage that I'm at, is trying to patiently wait for the Lord to grow my patience.